If folks have cell phones, please silence them. Thanks. Yeah.
So call the meeting to order.
All right. Okay, first item on the agenda is agenda analysis, and you want to talk about what we may want to add?
Yeah, I would like to consider moving the Beaver Creek Road plan from, it was in the discussion part later on, and I'd actually like to put that up
In discussion.
into a discussion. It was like somewhere down in the notes or something, communication.
Yeah, it was going to be a
move that up
communication
higher.
item, and we can put it under general business
Okay, yeah,
after item 6B or whenever you guys want to do.
we can make it 6C.
6C. Okay. Anything else that you want to change on the agenda?
Anybody else want to change anything?
No, I have some comments afterwards, but no.
Okay.
Okay. All right, and since we have some new members tonight, I wanted to do some introductions. So my name is Pete Walter. I'm Senior Planner, Community Development Department. I've been the staff liaison to the NRC for quite some time.
Doug Neely?
Nancy Broshot.
Mike Hamilton.
Devin Pilney. And I'm Chris Weaver.
Great. Welcome, guys. It's good to have you aboard.
Appreciate it.
Next item is public comments on non-agenda items.
Yeah, we apparently have one.
Okay, we do have one?
No, he has to get the form.
Okay.
Right in the back, you'll see.
Oh, you can
the
just
form.
fill one of those out if...
He needs your name and that kind of stuff.
So no comments on, or,
Other than
yeah,
him.
okay.
Yeah, just fill it out.
All right, you can fill that out afterwards. Oh, yeah.
William Foster. I live in Kenema. My comment is about the Oregon City Enhancement Day. I saw an announcement about it about a month ago.
Make sure your mic's on and, yeah, speak up. Yeah,
Yeah,
thanks.
so Oregon City Enhancement Day, I saw an announcement about it about a month ago, and I was curious, what kind of trees are they going to be planting? So I emailed the Parks Department, and they said there's oak, maple, zelkova, and ginkgo biloba. So I replied and asked what kind of oak and maple, and they didn't know, they couldn't tell me. Do any of you know what kind of species of oak and maple are going to be planted?
We don't know, but we can probably find out.
So, well, I looked at the city street tree list, and 6 of the 15 trees on there are maple, and 1 of those 6 are native vine maple. So I feel like the odds are that they're probably going to plant some non-native trees. And it seems like kind of a missed opportunity to not be planting native species of trees for this Enhancement Day. So I'm asking if you all have any sway in this, if we could plant native species instead of non-native ones. If not for this, then for future events like this, that would be, I'm sure I don't need to expound on the benefits of native vegetation to you all, but I think that would be much better. I understand that the ginkgo is one of these Hiroshima peace trees, so that might be meaningful to some people, so sure.
That's Hiroshima and ginkgo.
Right,
Yeah.
And then on a related note, the city street tree list, there's only 1 of the 15 trees are native, and it seems like it would be a good thing to amend it to include more, if not exclusively native trees. That's all I got.
The only thing I might make a comment on, we do have a list of street trees that we can plant, and I think it was adopted from Portland originally. I'm not sure. But you're right, I mean, it's not all indigenous trees at all.
So, yeah, 1 of the 15 is native.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's a bureaucratic nightmare that goes into amending that. But
Well, this committee gave input on the last update to the city street tree list, which was 2012. And then the city also has a native plant list, which includes trees and arborescent shrubs, but it hasn't been updated in a while. So what we do is we look to regionally accepted plant lists that have been really well vetted, such as the Portland plant list and that one. But that's a really good comment. So I will talked to the Parks Department. And the plantings are going to be both at Singer Creek Park and Oregon Trail Interpretive Center. So Singer Creek Park is within our Natural Resources Overlay District, and the Oregon Trail Interpretive Center has a couple of sections of it that are where you have to plant natives. So, but it's good to know.
Yeah, as I was going to comment, we have natural resource areas that are setbacks from streams or hazardous slide areas. And any plantings going into that are supposed to be native material.
I live in one, yeah.
You know.
Yep.
Yeah.
Thanks. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. And then next up, we have presentations. We have two presentations this evening. The first one is from the consulting company HDR, correct? And they're going to be presenting the I-205 widening and seismic improvements. So I'll ask them to come up and introduce yourselves. Thank you. And if you need another chair, just grab one, thanks. Yeah. And get the presentation going here. Let me know if that remote is working. You flip it back and forth.
I'm going to test it.
All right, committee members, thank you for having us this evening. My name is Kimberly Dinwiddie. I work with the Oregon Department of Transportation, and with me tonight are our colleagues from HDR Engineering. They're consultants hired by ODOT to design the I-205 seismic upgrade and widening project, and they're here to provide an update on the project as well as answer any questions that you may have as it relates to your work. And I will just turn it over to Brian and Mike to take it from here, and we're happy to take your questions.
Thank you, Kimberly. Good evening. My name is Mike Bertram with HDR Engineering, and on behalf of ODOT, I'm the HDR project manager. So my consulting team and my compatriots from ODOT were tasked with designing the improvements of 205 from Stafford Road all the way up to Oregon 213. Just a brief overview of the issues and the benefits that we're trying to achieve with the project. Number one, the area from Stafford up to 213 is the only remaining segment of 205 in Oregon that's 2 lanes in each direction. And in addition to that, specifically up in the northern part of West Linn and into Oregon City, we've got closely spaced on-ramps, which provides a lot of side friction, if you will, which translates into congestion. So we're trying to address that. And then additionally, throughout the corridor, there's a number of bridges, including the most major one being the Abernethy Bridge, where they're seismically vulnerable. So we are definitely in the Cascadia subduction zone, and we're trying to address the vulnerability of those structures because 205 is a lifeline route for the greater region. So the benefits of the project are going to be the addition of a third general capacity lane from Stafford Road all the way up to 213, the addition of auxiliary lanes in between northbound 43 to 99, and from 99 up to 213, and then southbound 99E all the way down to 43. So it should reduce a lot of the side friction and reduce congestion. And then most importantly, all of the structures from Stafford up to 213 are either going to be seismically retrofitted or entirely replaced to make them capable of accommodating the seismic demands that the Cascadia event would generate. Fast forward.
Nope, that's me.
So one of the major elements of the project, specifically as it relates to your vicinity, is the improvements of the Abernethy Bridge itself. So it's nearly a half a mile long, and it consists of 14 spans. And a lot of people don't realize it's that long because it spans 99E and 43 in addition to the river. And so it's been built many, many years ago, and when we widen it, this rendering is supposed to represent essentially looking from the northeastern corner of the bridge across the river to West Linn. So if you were to be northeast of John Storm Park, east side of that, the bent, if you will, on the right side of the screen, that would be Pier 3. So that's the first column that consists of the water spans, if you will. So those are areas where we're going to be constructing what are called super bents. So you might see the kind of the shadows of the does it have a pointer on it? Excellent. So these are the existing columns today, okay? And then the pier cap here. So when we go to improve and widen the structure, we're going to be constructing essentially a very similarly shaped bridge bent with the columns much further out than they are today. And the reason they're so far out is because these columns right now are supported by battered steel piles, so they go outwardly from the pier. And so we have to build them that wide to stay out of those piles, so the structure stays in its place while we're doing the widening. So our first phase of construction will be to build these bents and then widen both the northbound and the southbound structures to the outside, and then transversely launch the existing bridge to the outside. We'll literally just scooch it in place, 8 feet to the outside in both directions, and then come back and do the middle widening as a separate phase of work. So essentially, it'll look like the existing bridge on steroids when it's all said and done. Okay? So we will be doing this type of construction between Piers 3 all the way to Pier 7, which is the first waterside pier on the West Lynn side. And then everything on the land side, we'll be just doing widening to the outside because we don't have to do the slide in the water. So it's a very interesting and very technically challenging project, but it's an awful lot of fun if you're a gearhead like me. So, but in terms of the impacts of the project on the environment and the like, we brought Brian here today because we were specifically asked to come and address a couple of things related to Abernethy Creek. So turn it over to you to address that.
Thanks for the invite, Mr. Neely. Appreciate the opportunity to come. Always appreciate the opportunity to talk about the project and let folks help us, make a better project if we can. I'm the environmental person. You probably figured out the engineer. So I guess before we move on, did you guys have any questions about what Mike just said about how this thing was going to get done? You guys understand the transfer? Yeah?
I heard it. I got to hear this presentation as another advisory meeting about it. What's going to make your new support structures more seismically sound than what was there before? I mean, what it is, I don't want an engineer to speak, but maybe
Sure.
something that we can.
Sure, that's a great question. And essentially, to support these columns, these two massive columns with this huge cross beam, we're going to be drilling 12-foot diameter shafts 200 feet into the ground at each one of those piers for all the spans that are in the Willamette. On the land side, they're a little bit smaller, but just as deep. Additionally,
So the footings are not in a place that's going to do the, whatever they call it, where it turns to quicksand.
well, I was just going to touch upon that. So we are in
Liquefaction, that's
it's called
because the ones in Portland are in those.
liquefaction zone. Okay, so what we're going to be doing on the approach sides of both West Lynn and on the Oregon City side is we're going to be doing what's called ground improvements. We're going to do jet grouting micropiles to essentially stabilize the soils as much as we can to keep them from shifting laterally towards the river. Our engineering models suggest that the soil will literally move longitudinally towards the river along the alignment of 205 and puts side pressure on the piers. Okay, so that mitigation is intended to minimize that as much as possible. On the West Lynn side, the mitigation more or less is going to hold the soil in place and keep any lateral loading from affecting the bridge. We're not able to mitigate it in its entirety on the Oregon City side. So we will get some deflections in the existing bridge when it's in place, but not to the point where it doesn't perform its function, which is to be a lifeline route to provide, right after the event, access for emergency service providers and some form of commerce. So we'll be analyzing what the structure will look like after the event.
So there might be one bridge standing?
That bridge will be standing after the bridge. That's the whole idea. Along with the other twin structures as you work your way towards.
So it'll be single lane then during the construction phase?
Well, we want to maintain 2 lanes in each direction during construction with large enough shoulders to be able to accommodate emergency pull-offs and the like. But we're right in the middle of developing the traffic control and the sequencing drawings. But our mission is to maintain 2 in each direction and to minimize any disruptions. But there will be temporary closures, as you can imagine, throughout the job to set girders and to demolish existing structures that need to be taken down and the like.
So how many of these infrastructures are in the river itself?
Well, there are 2, 4, 6, 8. 8 shafts.
Eight shafts.
Yes, right.
Drilling into the river.
That is correct. So what we'll be doing is from both the land sides, we'll be building temporary bridges to provide access for the equipment, the personnel, and the materials to drill those shafts. So what you'll see is a bunch of steel piles get driven with a bridge deck constructed over the top, and the machines will come out and drill basically cofferdams, which will provide a water-free environment for the shaft construction to begin.
And you're going to accommodate the seasonal stage of the river? Okay.
Absolutely.
Pretty big.
Yeah. Currently, we're thinking this is going to take roughly 4 seasons to construct.
Impressive.
Is this downstream of the basalt flows, or are you actually going into basalt down there in that 200
Going down to
feet?
the basalt.
So, okay.
Yep. The tips of the shafts are at the rock layer, top of the rock
Okay.
layer. So it's a very challenging geological job, as you can imagine. With all the liquefaction, there's artesian issues, and sand and everything you can imagine.
You're going to have a submarine?
Pardon me?
You're going to have a submarine?
No, it might be interesting to have some subsurface cameras going
Yeah,
on.
absolutely.
We are going to have subsurface microphones going,
Yeah.
hydrophones, to do some recording of and collect some data.
Yeah. Which, brings you to the question of impacts on the fishery.
Absolutely.
And how do you envision this playing out to mitigate the salmonids and
Yeah.
lamprey and other fish of importance?
Maybe I can answer that question. It's a very long answer. I think some of those we can answer as we go through the presentation.
Okay.
And then the ones that don't, at the end, I'll try to come back and remember what the other ones that don't. Does that sound okay?
Sure.
Okay. Okay. So, in order to build the job, Mike had mentioned, that we have to have large work bridges that are going to go out into the river. We're going to be occupying portions of John Storm Park and Sportscraft Boat Park there at the launch. So there was a ballot measure, went through Oregon City like 2 years ago.
Yeah, it was 18.
Yeah. Yeah, we've been at this for a while. And the ballot measure, the folks of Oregon City decided that, yes, it would be a good idea to allow the project to occupy these areas. And I point out these areas in particular because a large portion of these areas are NRODs. We're gonna run through that. In this image that's up now, the subsurface stabilization that Mike was referencing are these brown areas. So that's where they're going to do the injection of the soil down below and mix the soil. It's going to be at a depth that at the end of the day, when the boys pick up their toys and go home and clean up the mess, that we'll be able to reestablish vegetation and conduct normal activities there. So a casual observer won't know it's there at the end of the day. A lot of that area is the parking lot now, so it's not really all that applicable until we get over near Abernethy Creek. There we go. And so this is taking off the graphics that were just on, or just an aerial of what it looks like today as a refresher. Generally, there's a large parking lot here underneath the bridge. Here is Abernethy Creek to the south. We envision a work bridge coming across about, 40 feet or so off of the edge of the bridge, coming out on both sides here. And then these areas here, the park areas up here will be used for staging of materials and whatnot. Yeah. So we have submitted a land use application recently and got a great education on the NROD areas and what that means, what the code means, and the planting requirements and all that good stuff. Within the project that Mike talked about in Oregon City from 213, at the top of the screen to the river, we have several NROD boundaries, some of which kind of surprised me. A and B certainly didn't down by the river in Abernethy Creek, and neither did C. D&E came as a little bit of surprise, but there is a water resource down at the Toa slope, or off the Toa slope there. And when we did our calculations, those areas also qualify for the NROD area. So they were treated as such in our application. These are, the next couple of images are kind of what the site plans are and what exists today. We went out and did the assessment of each one of the NROD areas. I think, well, there's, obviously within the area surrounding Abernethy Creek here, there's a bunch of cottonwood and locusts, those kinds of what I would call primary establishments, early riparian species. Oregon ash is also on the north bank. And then this doesn't show, but up in this area, it's all grass, as you saw in the other area, with a couple, half dozen of park trees that are planted there. This is a stretch along 205. It was depicted as C, I believe. It's a stretch when you drive down 205 that is those rows of cedars. So those are going to get impacted by the project, as this is where the Ox Lane is going from 99 northbound up to 213. And this is the other area, NROD area. Not a whole lot of trees in this area, but a lot of invasive weeds in this area. A lot of blackberry, a lot of English ivy, teasel in this area. When we come through all these areas, we treat it for invasive weeds when, as we're wrapping up the project before we leave the project. So they'll certainly see a benefit as well as a replanting benefit when the project's all said and done. So it's a light touch on the NROD areas. Getting to your question, Mr. Hamilton, about what are some of the mitigations and things that we're doing in the project that are going to help offset or minimize our impacts to aquatic species. Early on, we met with ODF&W as well as NIMS and National Fisheries Service, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And one of the things they brought to our attention was they believe that Abernethy Creek is a partial fish barrier for fish passage during low flows. And they also pointed out the culvert, as did several other people under 99. And, the culvert is outside the project area. We're not touching the culvert. But we did take a look at the culvert. I walked in about a half mile, maybe a quarter mile into the culvert. It's pretty flat. And there is not a barrier at the culvert itself, or as the culvert is in there today, nor is it a barrier. So it didn't appear to be a priority to ODF&W, but getting fish up there was a priority to them. They and the Grand Ronde, I don't know if you guys are familiar or not, tag juvenile fish and have some data on juvenile fish migration up into the Abernethy Creek system. And they were noting some stalls in migration down here. So one of the things that the project is going to do is place a pier into Abernethy Creek. Not ideal from a fisheries perspective, but a necessity of the project. The way that we're going to mitigate impacts to fish and wildlife when we construct the pier is the first thing that's going to happen is a large casing goes in the ground. Well, first thing we're going to do is do it during the in-water work window. ODF&W granted us an extended in-water work window for this project, with the exception of Abernethy Creek, because they didn't want to interfere with coho migration up the creek for the native fish. So we backed off the in-water work extension in Abernethy Creek and are going to do that work during the normal in-water work window. When we install the temporary work bridge, instead of driving pile with an impact camera, we're going to vibe it in. You heard me reference earlier a underwater microphone or hydroacoustic measurements. Impact pile driving has a much larger impact to fish. It is known to cause mortality due to swim bladder. Am I telling you guys things you know? I'm sorry. That's fine. So we're going to move forward. We're going to use vibe-only methods and only use impact to finish seating the pile to help minimize impacts. When we install the drill shaft, we're going to put a casing in. That casing is going to go down, well, maybe all the way to the center of the earth. Yet to be decided, but down far enough that we won't have any fracking out issues, if you will. It will fully contain the excavation and the concrete pour in it, and that casing will extend up above the work bridge elevation, and then be sealed off by the work bridge so that everything is sealed. There's not an opportunity to make a big mess in the river for that part of the operations. When we are done, we are going to address the fish passage problem in the creek. We're going to go and dig out all that riprap and put in a real stream bottom in that creek. We're going to put some large woody material in there, make some habitat, complex habitat. We're going to strategically place large boulders to maintain a low flow channel to hopefully permanently eliminate the low flow partial barrier that exists today. So we're going to do that from the culvert down to the mouth of the Willamette River. And hopefully that's going to help that system reestablish, help the coho get back up in there, and the juvenile migrate in and out of there as the water levels in the Willamette fluctuate and they seek refugia habitat. So that was important to ODF and W, something that we heard and we were able to incorporate to the project as one of our mitigation measures. So at the end of the day, we'll be excavating some of the stream bank back as represented on the right side of the pictures on the bottom. We'll put some large woody material in there, as I mentioned. We'll be reestablishing the banks with a lot more soil than that's there today and doing a full replanting effort on it as well. With native materials.
With native, I was going to say with native,
yes, with native
black
materials.
locust.
No, we won't plant any of that. I mean, unless you have a request.
No.
Actually, NIMS wouldn't be, or DSL wouldn't be too happy about that.
No.
So that's the plan within Abernethy Creek. And so Abernethy, so I have to apologize, our engineers always turn our worlds upside down when we try to work. So as a natural resource person, it becomes complicated. In this image, north is down. So Abernethy Creek is actually above 205. But this is a kind of a representation, if you will. It's not our planting plan, because our planting plan is very engineering. We absolutely can share, that, and it's in the land use application as well. But this is a graphic that was put together to give a visual representation of what we envision it looking like. So the area around Abernethy Creek is, we're going to replant and reestablish that area. The area down into the park, our plan is to put back what's there today in the park. Unless the parks come back and say, hey, you know what, we really like to have these trees here or there, or this different species tree because of X, Y, or Z. I mean, we're open to that. Parks hasn't come back and said they want anything different. But if they do, we're more than open to the conversation. And then down along, underneath the bridge and wrapping around the bridge where we're going to be having impacts to the riparian area here, we'll be replanting that area with natives as well.
Putting the parking lot back.
Oh, we're putting the parking lot back. And we're also establishing parking just across the streets. So now there is parking here, which would be along the west side of the road. We're going to establish some parking lots on the east side of the road. We heard from the Parks Committee that there is a lack of parking, and specifically for passenger vehicles. And so we're going to add a couple of, I think it equates to something like 8 spaces.
I think it's a little less than that.
Yeah, that's 5 or 6.
So, okay,
Yeah.
5 or 6. Oh, right, we had this discussion at the last meeting.
But it's in response to the ballot measure commitment as well.
Mm-hmm. So let me talk, I guess I'll ask you, want to hear about more mitigation measures?
On Abernethy Creek, the bottom of the outfall, do you know if it's always underwater in the Willamette?
If the culvert is always underwater in the Willamette?
Yeah. I mean, with the change in elevation of the river.
So I walked through it during a low flow period, and the sediment in the bottom of the culvert was somewhere around 12 to 16 inches, and the water on top was more than a foot deep. So as I walked through it in the low flow, I had to kind of tiptoe along the side of it, or I would have dunked my waders.
Okay.
I can't say that that's always the case, but that I purposely went there in low flow to check that out.
Good.
Do you guys want to hear about more mitigation measures? No?
Actually, I do have a question.
Yeah.
I've always been curious what happens with stormwater management originating from the surface flows on the bridges and overpasses themselves. Yeah, I understand that on land, ODOT sets aside mitigation and detention areas, but what happens on the bridges? And is this an opportunity to address that?
we will be addressing it. Yeah, we're taking the bridges, the water off of the bridges and to those treatment areas on the land.
Okay.
Yeah, so now there are some scuppers that drain, for example, into the parking lot or adjacent to the parking lot that have created some concerns for some folks in Oregon City. Those are going to be gone. There will be water treatment facilities in the loops within 99. There's going to be a water treatment facility somewhere in this vicinity around the bridge or around the Clackamas Drive. It is yet to be finalized as we tweaked our plans a little bit recently. We have to go back and revisit it. But we will not, we're not allowed to directly discharge water into the Willamette River without treating it first.
That's good to know.
Yeah. I know it's out of our jurisdiction, but just those huge pylons that go into the middle of the river, how does that impact water quality, and what do you guys do about that?
And impacts fishes too, do they impact fish?
Totally. Yeah, I would think so.
You're talking about the permanent piers that are being placed in?
Yeah.
So we ran a hydraulics analysis on that to take a look at what would be the differential sediment migration and or large woody material migration down the stream that would result from the new piers. And we did that in part because we want to make sure that we are not creating a problem for other users in the rivers. As you know, and in particular, Oregon State Marine Board and the docks downstream, they were very interested in large woody material movements. You guys know they had those rows of pile they put out because they kept having problems with it. So we did a big hydraulics analysis on that, and what we found out was the differential or contraction scour. So contraction scour is a result of okay, I'll just, if I'm being too technical, just tell me. The contraction scour is a result of the differential velocities, as I know it, that are created by objects that are put in the water.
Right.
And there is, because of the substrate that's there now, and there's a lot of riprap there now, there is not expected to be large contraction scour that's going to result in scour holes. There will be a slight shifting in woody material movement along the east side of the river, where it will shift more towards the center because of where Pier 4, upstream Pier 4 is being placed. It's going to catch and shift some of that woody material a little earlier. But we're not expecting long-term contamination issues as a result.
And no backwater rise.
And no rise.
Okay.
And when the fish are either migrating upstream or the juveniles downstream, does the activities there affect them?
I would lie to you if I said it did not affect them. They will be affected by the project. And so we entered into consultation with NIMS to get a take permit for it. There are fish there year round, and you can't avoid not impacting them. We can do our best to minimize our impacts to them. And we have done so. One of the things that's interesting about the method of installing these large shaft is we anticipate using an oscillator to install them, which is a machine that grabs and kind of twists and advances the casing. It's believed that has a very small hydroacoustic footprint in the water, but nationally there isn't much data about that. So one of the things National Marine Fisheries asked us to do was to collect hydroacoustic data during that installation method, so that they can build their national database and validate what they suspect the findings will be.
But there are no thresholds or levels that you're trying to stay below because there aren't standards for that?
We would, our consultation allows us to have hydroacoustic impacts that are above the take threshold, which is 187 decibels for behavioral modifications or 205 for mortality.
Wow.
And it is in our consultation to allow that relative to, after we vibe in the pile, we strike it a few times to make sure it has the bearing capacity for the work bridge to sit on. The oscillation, the limited data to date, does not suggest it will get anywhere near those values.
Okay. So they've submitted a land use application. It's still not in the completeness review phase, I believe. when it's deemed complete, we'll be sending out public notices. Your land use application consists of natural resource overlay district and some other applications as well, I think, right? So
Lots of others, yes.
Site plan and design review. Site plan and design review is pretty standard, and then a few other things because it's within the Willamette River Greenway, so there's a compatibility review. And there's probably some geologic slope situations there, potentially.
There is, yes.
Yeah.
Geohazard zones.
Geohazards, so that's part of it too. So there's a lot going on. And hopefully the comment period can coincide with the Natural Resources Committee meeting, which is the second Wednesday of every month. And that way, if that is possible, this committee can meet as a public body and deliberate about a recommendation. Otherwise, they can't do it and can only comment as individuals. So, yeah.
Oh.
So, yeah, thank you.
Would be happy if there's more discussion warranted during deliberations, if the opportunity presents itself to.
When do you hope to start? When's groundbreaking?
You want to
Groundbreaking is contingent on funding, and currently construction funding has not been identified for this project, but I know that they're very close on their design. Are you guys like in the 90% of design?
For phase 1 of the project, which is currently envisioned to be from 10th Street up to 213, our 60% plans are due this summer.
Okay.
And we should be ready to advertise the project near the tail end of 21.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
With construction hopefully to begin that following spring.
Wow. 22.
But again, as Kimberly said, it's all contingent upon funding.
Yeah.
And the sooner it's identified, the faster we can go.
Okay.
And you presented to the Parks and Rec Advisory Committee already, or? Okay. Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for having us. Nice night.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, that's fine.
Oh, I wanted to make a correction. The pit tag monitoring of juveniles was not by the Confederate Tribes of Grand Ronde, it was by the Warm Springs.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, they collected fish at the falls, pit tagged them and released them near the marina.
Yeah, I'm surprised knowing some of the Grand Line's other activities here and how closely they're tied to the center of the Warm Springs of that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You bet.
Good evening.
Have a good night. Thanks. Next up, we have Audubon Society's Mary Coolidge, and she's graciously come here to give us a great presentation on night sky and impacts on lighting impacts on birds. But I gather it's going to be very informative, and I know that Jerry Herman has been looking forward to this for some time as well. So thanks and welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
It sounds like I'm on. How do I advance this? Where do I need to be pointing?
Let me show you. It's on. Okay, now it's on.
Oh, it's off. Okay.
you
There we go.
Yep.
Great. Okay.
Those don't look like the skies I see when I'm in downtown Portland.
Not enough of those in Oregon City.
Well, you'll get a prize if you can tell me what's interesting about this first photo, actually. But I just wanted to make sure I had my housekeeping stuff out of the way before I got started. My name is Mary Coolidge. I'm here from Portland, Audubon, by informal invitation from Jerry Herman and formal invitation from Pete Walter. So thanks for having me here. I was asked to come talk about urban hazards for birds, primarily about light pollution impacts, but relatedly window collisions. And, you know, I'm probably preaching to the choir here a little bit, given that this is the Natural Resources Committee. But the idea is just to start to guide the conversation and the thinking toward thinking about what we can do to make our novel urban ecosystems healthier for birds to be occupying. Anybody notice anything interesting about this photo?
actually see the Milky Way.
This is a photo by Haroon Memedinovich and Gavin Heffernan. They're a duo who has something called the Sky Glow Project. And they went around North America taking photos of the night sky in some of the darkest available places.
Eucalyptus and a palm tree.
This is actually a photo of downtown LA. It's a composite photo with a beautiful Milky Way sky overhead. And
The wrong kind of trees.
the
You
wrong
notice there's a palm tree here.
yeah.
And eucalyptus.
Right.
And the sky is never in LA like that.
Never in LA like that. Yeah. And really what I love about this photo is I think it helps remind us that even in our cities, there is a sky full of stars up there every night. If only we could draw back that curtain of light pollution. And we're not going to get the Milky Way back in any of our largest cities, even in some of our smaller ones. But can we start thinking about what it would take to protect at least what we have left and slow the advancement of light pollution? This is a photo also by the same duo, Haroon Memedinovich and Gavin Heffernan of Crater Lake National Park. And I think this does a nice job of illustrating really somewhat what the Earth looked like for 4.5 billion years before we had artificial light on it. And occupants of Earth would have slept on clear nights, would have slept under skies like this every night of the year. And biological systems were evolving under conditions of dark nights and bright days, which set up this relationship with biological systems that we call circadian rhythms. Essentially, light and dark is our master clock and drives all of our biological processes. But of course, all of that has changed in about the last 130 years since we started installing electric street lighting on some of the cities around the world and really started lighting up the night on a global scale. And now most people on the planet actually live in urban areas where they're awash in artificial light all night long from various sources, street lights, billboards, sports field lighting, all kinds of things like that. This is something called the Bortle scale. It was invented by a guy named Bortle, who invented it for use by astronomers to compare the relative impact of light pollution on their observation sites. So on the right-hand side is a Class 1 excellent dark sky site like you might find in southeastern Oregon, on Steens Mountain, for example, and then on the left is an 8 or 9 inner city sky. Portland is at about a 7. We don't have much to brag about up there. LA is an 8 or a 9. Oregon City is probably somewhere between a 5 and a 6. I just took a rough guess at that. I have seen some pretty brilliant Oregon City night skies because I actually work 2 days a week in Oregon City at the Condor breeding facility out at the edge of Oregon City. And there's not a whole lot of light pollution out there. So there are some nice skies when I get to work early in the morning. Sauvie Island is probably about a 5, maybe borderline between a 4 and a 5. So you can see the progressive impact of light pollution on the ability to see stars. This is something called the New World Atlas of Artificial Night Sky Brightness that came out in 2016. It was put together by a team of Italian astronomers and a NOAA researcher. They used visual infrared imaging to look at light pollution around the globe. And they essentially set that to, you'll see the relationship here. Here's the Bortle scale, those colored numerical system. And they essentially used a similar legend to represent light pollution. So you can see here, I'm not going to try to use the pointer behind your heads, but in the inset, you can see Portland is that red area that has the X in it. So Oregon City would be just, kind of at the southern edge of that. But you get an idea of what the impact of light pollution is in our country. East of the Mississippi, it's not looking so good. But west of the Mississippi, we actually still have a lot of sky left to preserve. One of the interesting things that came out of this data collection was the realization that about 99% of people in the U.S. live under light polluted skies, and 80% of people live in places from which they can't see the Milky Way, which is our own home galaxy. And what do we do when we so completely divorce ourselves from our understanding of where we are in the solar system? And these are just some examples of how we get there. These are all taken in Portland. You can see in the upper left-hand corner is one of our parks with completely unshielded light poles. Other examples of glare bombs, parking lots that are absolutely empty at night and they're still illuminated all night long. So that's how we end up with the light polluted skies that we have. We are also, as you well know, living in the age of conversion from high pressure sodium to LED. I'm quite sure that, well, I'm not at all quite sure. I think Oregon City has completed its streetlight conversion from high pressure sodium to LED, at least in the places I'm familiar with. And LED is fantastic. LEDs are really energy efficient, they're long lived, they're relatively maintenance free, but some kinds of LEDs come with some unintended consequences, which is what this spectrograph is in the upper right-hand corner. That's a diagram of what we call blue rich white light. So a 4,000 Kelvin LED, which is generally how we describe LEDs, is in Kelvin temperature. And this kind of light, blue rich white light, actually produces a blue spike, about 450 nanometers. And that happens to be, well, first of all, short wavelength light, which scatters more readily in the atmosphere, which means that it produces more light pollution. More of it ends up in the sky. The other thing is it's the kind of light that most vertebrate systems are sensitive to. So you or I, if we have exposure to blue rich white light, we have non-vision forming cells in our eyes. That's just the kind of light that tells our brains it's time to wake up. The same thing happens in other vertebrate systems. So this kind of light is particularly impactful. And our job now, we have so many LED products that are available to us at this point, is to just start to make better choices about the LEDs that we're installing and converting to. When we're exposed to this kind of light, I meant to say this causes suppression of melatonin secretion, which makes it hard for us to sleep, and it leads to a cascade of other health effects. So much so that the American Medical Association in 2016 came out with a report where they recommended that jurisdictions choose lighting when doing conversions that really minimizes the emission of this kind of blue light because of concerns about health impacts like cancer and diabetes and cardiovascular disease, and also retinal damage to humans, because this kind of light, when it glares in your eyes, can cause irreversible damage. It used to be that when folks were talking about light pollution, it was really from strictly an astronomical point of view. And even though we've known for hundreds of years that light acts as an attractant to vertebrate systems, particularly birds at night, it has only been a really focused area of study in the last 20 to 30 years. So now there's this growing body of research on something called ecological light pollution, looking at issues of attraction and disorientation, so things like bats that are attracted to streetlights, where invertebrates are collecting around the lights. Other birds may be congregating there as well to prey on those insects. Other bats are actually repelled by light. Lighting in many cases can actually act as a habitat fragmentation issue, as much as a road or a wall could be. Circadian rhythm disruption, which is really what is driving nesting and breeding and foraging and migration, all of those kinds of cycles in biological systems. So really important there as well. And then interference with all ecological relationships. Ecological systems are so very carefully choreographed, and when we start to introduce things that impact them, we're really messy. We're tinkering with something that's beyond our ability to even understand what all of the implications could be. This is just a very few titles of research papers that have been written on the topic. Really, there are hundreds of articles looking at this issue, and none of it is good news. When you introduce artificial light at night, there's going to be bad news in one way or another for biological systems, particularly those that can't go home at night and draw the curtains. Focusing on birds, bird migration is really one of the most impressive feats in the animal kingdom, long-distance migrations. Most birds actually migrate at night, even if they're diurnal, and they will take off 30 to 60 minutes after sunset. They will watch where the sun went down, and they'll travel in the direction that they're intending to travel based on where the sun went down. They'll also be following the North Star or Polaris and Orion and the Big Dipper to help guide them on their path, on their migratory path. And they'll fly all night long if conditions are good. They're doing that because there are fewer predators out, the atmosphere is less turbulent, and because they're using those stars to help them migrate. And then they get into trouble when they come into areas where there's an excessive amount of light pollution that's drowning out the stars. This is one very dramatic example that maybe you've heard about. There's been a lot written about it. This is the Tribute in Light in Lower Manhattan, New York. It's only illuminated one night a year. It's been illuminated since, I think, 2002 was the first night that it was illuminated. Folks at New York City Audubon and Fordham University started noticing that there were birds that were congregating in these spires of light. So all of those white dots and dashes, those are all birds that are actually entrapped in that light. So they're on a migratory path. They come into that light, they get drawn in, and they just circle and circle and circle and circle. So researchers started looking at this. They did work out a deal with folks who are running that lighting system to turn it off every so often when they hit a critical mass of birds in it. It allows the birds to then disperse and carry on with their migration. They have data from 2008 to 2016 that they just published last year. It's really interesting. What they basically found was when the lights were on, birds aggregated. When the lights went off, birds dispersed. And the upper right-hand square up there shows September 12th, 2015. It's 2:12 a.m. The tribute lights are off at this moment, and they're using radar technology that tells them there's about a density of 500 birds in the area of the tribute in light. 20 minutes later, 2:32 a.m., those lights are on, and there are now 15,700 birds within half a kilometer of the tribute in light. They found that when those lights were on, the density of birds in the area could reach anywhere from 60 to 150 times the expected density of birds when the lights were off. They found a minimum of 20 times the density in all the years that they were looking at this.
Are they dazzled? I mean, are they losing orientation abilities?
Yeah.
Being the light?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, think about if you're in a dark forest and there's a strong beam of light and you're in it, you have no ability to navigate outside that field of light, right? And you're reluctant to leave it. And then when the lights go off, well, now your eyes aren't calibrated to darkness. So it's definitely troubling. And, I think overall this is a success story that they're able to work with the folks that are operating the Tribute in Light. But are some of the birds that are entrapped and then go on to disperse when the lights go off, do they make it to their destination unimpeded? Mm-hmm. Probably not. They probably fly in all sorts of directions, and that may be an area of future research. There have been a few instances in the last few years that maybe you remember, one in Texas at the Standard Insurance building where nearly 400 birds collided with the building in one night. They subsequently turned the lights off for the remainder of migration season. Hopefully they're continuing to do that. I'm not tracking Standard Insurance in Galveston, but and then the NASCAR Hall of Fame had an incident where hundreds of chimney swifts hit the building in one night last year. So these things do happen. The other issue that's at play is just that birds are attracted into these highly lit areas. They then spend the night in cities. They wake up the following morning and they are surrounded by deceptive window glass, which they are then somewhat likely to run into during the day. So these are related issues. And we know that up to 1 billion birds die every year as the result of running into a window. That's in North America alone. It's one of the top 3 conservation issues for birds after habitat destruction and feral cats. So it's a very significant issue. So we really want to start to get a handle on the issue of window glass and also the issue of light pollution and how those things are functioning to influence each other. This is a photo of the Columbia Wastewater Treatment Building. It's a City of Portland building in North Portland. That building opened in 2014. We pretty immediately started getting reports from building occupants about birds hitting the windows. This is a single-story building near the Columbia Slough. We monitored that building for 1 year together with the City of Portland. They subsequently did a retrofit to those windows. We monitored the building for another year, had a 94% reduction in the strike rate at that building. So a huge success story. It's an $11.5 million building. It cost $28,000 for them to put this retrofit on. And I included this here just so you could see, since I think maybe potentially looking at reducing collision hazards in Oregon City might be something that could be on your docket in the future. We're talking about markings on the window that are distributed across the window, but can cover as little, that can create as little as a 6% density of a pattern on the window. People who use this building have actually reported that it doesn't impede their view in or out, and yet it's really doing a tremendous job of reducing window strikes on that building. There was a metadata study that came out in 2014 by Scott Loss and some fellow researchers looking at 93,000 strike records across the United States. And they found, to everybody's surprise, that nearly half of all collisions are happening at 1 to 3 story buildings. And a little over half of all collisions are happening at low-rise commercial buildings, so buildings that are 4 to 11 stories high. Less than 1% of all collisions are happening at high rises. That's not because high rises aren't experiencing strikes, but it is because there are so many fewer high-rise buildings across the landscape. When the numbers in parentheses there are the average, an average number of those types of buildings across the nation. So 123 million 1 to 3 story buildings, 15 million low-rise buildings, and 21,000 high-rises. So that's how you start to get at where those strikes are occurring and why. And it also told us that we really had to start addressing strikes at all levels of development. We couldn't just be pinpointing high rises anymore, which is kind of where we thought most of the issue was.
Quick question for you, Benson. Is this bigger photo here? Is that post-retrofit?
This is pre-retrofit.
Okay.
I do have a post-retrofit photo. It's not in this presentation, but I think you'd be surprised at how unobtrusive it is to the building overall. Okay. And it would have been less expensive, honestly, for them to have just incorporated a bird-safe glass from the beginning. Right about the same time, shortly after this building opened, but before there was a bird strike issue, the City of Portland did incorporate a green bird-safe requirements into the green building policy, which meant that any city buildings had to actually be built to bird-safe specs. In 2011, the U.S. Green Building Council incorporated bird-safe elements into their LEED pilot credit, or into their LEED manual in the form of a pilot credit. So that was kind of the start of looking at green buildings starting to really address this issue. There are a number of milestones in this list, but I'll skip to the fact that in 2018, we incorporated bird-safe glazing requirements into our central city plan in Portland. So any building in the central city that has 30% or more glazing on any facade has to treat up to 60 feet of that facade with bird-safe materials. If you're doing a retrofit that's going to impact more than 75% of the facade, again, you have to use bird-safe materials up to 60 feet on that particular facade. It hasn't halted development. I'll tell you what we have seen is a lot of developers coming in at 29% glazing. So what we've done is slow the rate of proliferation of glass on the landscape. We are starting to see some bird-safe buildings come through design review at this point. Oh, I didn't mean to mention that bird-safe standards are in place in at least 15 other cities that I know of in North America, most recently New York City. So throughout the city in all 5 boroughs, buildings have to be built to bird-safe specs. That won't go into effect until next year, but it's been developed. These are the details of the bird-safe glazing standard in Portland Central City Plan. I actually think that this is really kind of an introductory conversation, so if you're really interested in pursuing something like this for Oregon City, I'll come back and we'll have a more in-depth conversation about it. Back to light pollution and some of the impacts that have been researched. This is a study out of the University of South Florida by a researcher named Meredith Kernbach, who took 50 house sparrows and injected them all with West Nile virus, a non-lethal level of West Nile virus. And then she subjected half of them to a low level of artificial light all night long. The other half of them were allowed to sleep in dark conditions. And she found that the birds that were exposed to even dim light at night took them longer to kick West Nile virus out of their systems, almost twice as long as the birds that were allowed to sleep in darkness. And when they modeled that, they found that that could increase the potential outbreak of West Nile virus by 40%. Wow. These are common urban birds. So this is something to think about. If we're exposing them to artificial light at night, are we reducing their ability to kick diseases out of their systems? And they are potentially disease vectors. This is from a 2018 climate science report that was prepared for Congress that has a chapter on the Pacific Northwest that says that we can expect warmer temperatures, more mosquitoes, more West Nile virus, and more people getting infected. That doesn't have anything to do with recent research that says that birds could become more virulent carriers of West Nile virus if they're exposed to artificial light at night. So something sobering to think about. The public health consequences. These are a couple of studies. The one on the left is out of the Stanford Sleep Epidemiology Lab in 2016. The one on the right is out of the Harvard School of Public Health in 2019. They both essentially found that people who are exposed to greater levels of artificial light at night have a harder time sleeping and essentially don't sleep as well, don't have as good of sleep patterns, and don't sleep as long. In the case of the study out of Stanford, they found that that was consistent with symptoms of circadian rhythm disorder, which people are now being diagnosed with. In the study on the right, they actually found that they could correlate people's shorter sleep periods with being at higher levels in areas that were poorer. It's not exactly clear why that is. We could go into research on tree canopy in poorer neighborhoods, but that's, again, a much longer presentation. But something to think about in terms of equity. If we're subjecting people to street lighting, for example, that's trespassing into their homes, and they don't have the money to plant trees in the front yards to help block that, or the money to buy light darkening curtains for their rooms, we may be subjecting them at higher rates to the impacts of artificial light at night impairing their ability to sleep. Anybody familiar with Travis Longcore's work? He's a professor at UCLA and at USC who does a lot of work on the ecological impacts of light pollution. No, okay. This is some research that I just found that he just actually sent. Looking at the relative circadian impact of different light sources. So on the left-hand side of that graph are various light sources. The top one, D65, is synonymous with sunlight. If you read down that list a little bit, you can see full moon is listed there. Then you can see Los Angeles LED, which is a 4200 Kelvin bulb. Then 3000 Kelvin LED. Do y'all know what your LEDs were converted to here in Oregon City? My hunch is 4,000 because it has been for a long time the Department of Energy recommendation. Portland has converted to 4,000 Kelvin LED. They have now committed to switching out any bulbs that go out or need servicing with a 3,000 Kelvin bulb, which has relatively less blue light in it. I was hoping to just orient you all to yourselves here on this graph, but I don't think we can necessarily do that. You might be about 4,000. If you head further down, there's a 150 watt high pressure sodium, and all of these lights are actually calibrated to that. So they're considering that they're neutral. And then the lamps that are below that on this list are generally phosphor-coated lights, LED lights, or they are filtered lights. So that means that the relative output of those lights is much yellower, not so much blue. Everything above high-pressure sodium has more blue output. The longer that red line and all of the lamps closer to the top, that means more blue output associated with those lamps. You can see that relative to a 150 watt high pressure sodium bulb there, relatively near the bottom of the list, a 3000 Kelvin LED puts off 150% more light that causes melatonin suppression, which is problematic for all vertebrates, really. So this gives us an idea of what the potential wildlife impacts are of blue-rich white light. Travis Longcore just said a very few days ago, we know enough to take action on mitigation. There's a lot of pushback out there. We need more data. We need more information. We don't really know what all of the impacts are yet. But the truth is, he's been studying this for over 20 years. There's so much research out there. It's only growing. But we know enough already to say that blue-rich white light doesn't belong outside at night, so in exterior applications. It's great. It's like daylight. We should be using it in our offices during the day to keep us awake and alert, but we shouldn't be exposed to this kind of light at night. Really quickly, we all have smartphones now, right? All of our smartphones have settings on them to dial that blue light down at night. We know that we shouldn't be getting that into our eyes after a certain time, or it's going to start to impair our sleep. Same with whether you have a Mac or a PC, these programs on newer computers are just built in. On older computers, you can get apps that dial that light down so that you're getting less blue light later in the day. Really quickly to talk about energy waste. These are Department of Energy numbers from 2011, but they estimated that about 35% of light is wasted because it's poorly designed, it's throwing light up into the sky, it's brighter than it needs to be, it's not directed at where we need it. That represents $3 billion a year of energy lost and also 15 million tons a year of CO2 emissions. So in a time of climate change, this is a place where we can be focusing our efforts at curbing our emissions. We need to be designing our lighting better. There are best practices that have been developed. They're pretty basic. Most of them are intuitive once you get familiar with them. Minimize any unnecessary lighting. So if you don't need it, turn it off. You just don't turn it on at all. Fully shield fixtures, make sure that light is aimed down. You still want to limit the total lumen output of the lamp because even if something is shielded and pointed down, it's going to reflect off of other surfaces, especially when they're wet. And we know all too well that it's really wet here a lot of months of the year. So a lot of that light still ends up in the sky just because it's bouncing. Outdoor lighting at night should be warm, so really 3,000 kelvins or below. Travis Longcore is now starting to recommend 2,200 kelvins. You don't get the efficacy out of 2,200 kelvins, which is why municipalities aren't rushing toward this. But 2,700 kelvins and 3,000 kelvins, you get the same efficacy. And then using smart controls, so using dimmers, using timers, turning lights off or at least down during low volume times. All of this technology is at our fingertips at this point. Just a very few examples of what, we all see examples of good lighting and bad lighting. So on the left is the Fair Hair Dumbbell. This is a relatively new building in Portland. Cool building, doesn't look like any of the other buildings around it, which is at least interesting on the nightscape and the dayscape. And unfortunately, they installed LED lights on the canopies of all of the entrances, and all of that light shines up on the building to illuminate that artwork. On the right is another painting in the city of Portland called Mother Earth. On another relatively new building, it's illuminated from the top down. That's really what we want to see. We're not saying don't light our artwork, our public art at night, but we're saying light it responsibly. and maybe turn it off at some point or dim it at some point in the night. Sports field lighting, this is just a stock photo on the upper left because I don't have a good photo of bad sports field lighting. But there are a number of companies now that are making good sports field lighting that doesn't piss all of the neighbors off. I get so many calls from neighbors from various high schools around town saying, the game's been over for hours, the lights are still on, it's trespassing into our yards. So there is good sports field lighting out there that helps train that light right on the ball fields. And then you just need a commitment that the lights will go off after the game is over and the field is picked up. Billboard lighting, most billboards are lit from the bottom up. Some billboards are lit from the top down. So could we move toward a model of asking our billboard companies to actually light from the top down? And then these are various pictures, several of them from upper left, upper right, lower left, lower right. Those are all the High Line Trail in New York City. And that's all really nice ambient lighting that creates a beautiful sense of space. It doesn't create glare bombs. It's not creating a lot of light trespass into the sky. The middle picture on top is from Amsterdam. The bottom picture in the middle, I don't know where that's taken, but it's nice landscape lighting that's relatively low, keeps the light close to the ground, it's warm. So really, the question I'm always asking is, can we light our cities so that they feel safe and pleasant and vibrant, nice places for people to be, and that are still not contributing so much to light pollution? And I think the answer is yes. We see plenty of examples of this kind of thing working, even in places like New York City. So if they can do it in New York, we can do it in Portland, we can do it in Oregon City, and we really need leadership from our local leaders on making sure that this kind of thing is incorporated into our long-term planning documents, that it's incorporated into our development review processes, that we're really working to make sure that our ecosystems can function as well as they can, that we're looking at livability for people as well, and we're preserving our night sky. I think I'm done.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any residual questions? I have
Have you been in Hilo?
Say again?
Hilo, Hawaii. Have you been in Hilo?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, because all of the Big Island has the sodium lights because of the telescopes on Mauna
Right.
Kea.
I was gonna say-
They're legally required to have lights that won't shine into the area.
Butter yellow.
And I
Astronomy.
lived in
yellow.
San Jose, and the same thing for the Lick Observatory. The whole city of San
Yeah.
Jose is
Yeah.
so
So
narrow
please.
bands. And
Yeah.
Can we look at our sign code?
Yeah, sure, we can. It's actually part of our site plan and design review criteria. And I think we're going into the comprehensive plan update, and the basic thought was we wouldn't be doing any code amendments for a while until we'd gotten through that process. So, but it's something that should be discussed. The lighting code was last revised, fully revised, I think, in 2010. But it didn't take into account LEDs, and it didn't take into account this light spectrum Kelvin temperature issue. So those kinds of things.
Right, yeah, and I'll give you huge props that Oregon City even has lighting code. The city of Portland has virtually no lighting code. So we are just developing that right now, and it's a big lift. Since you all already have some bones of a lighting code on the books, amending that is easier than initiating a code from nothing. And a lot of places are in the same boat. LED is really relatively new. Nobody realized the kinds of consequences that putting some of this blue-rich white light out there might have. And so most lighting codes at this point that aren't brand new need to be revised to incorporate this idea of blue-rich white lighting. And then things like saying when sports fields are being redesigned or redeveloped, they need to put in this better technology, things like that. So writing some of...
Westland High School
Turn 'em
football
off.
field is on
Yeah, it's
all the time,
Yeah.
continually. Like, I'll get up at 2 a.m. and the
Yeah.
lights are on. What
Yeah.
the heck?
Right.
we see
Don't they have a climate change
Yeah,
action
we're over in
plan?
Oregon City, and we can,
That was Milwaukee. Yeah,
That's
not
crazy.
West Lynn. Yeah, so I know we've got a sport lighting requirement, and I think it does have a time limit on it.
I don't see the lights from Oregon City High School,
Yeah,
and the football field is like,
Right.
5-6 blocks. I don't see that, but I see West Lynn continuously.
yeah. All right. Sorry.
Go rabble rouse across the river.
Yeah, really.
They must have money
Yeah, we can,
on the lights.
yeah, this is an agenda item.
Yeah, I think we should do that.
Yeah,
you very
so
much.
I don't know why I have 4 business cards. It was all I had on me. But I'm happy to leave them. If you have any follow-up questions, feel free to get in touch with me. If you want to talk about bird-safe glazing measures, I've been through that process in the city of Portland. Definitely have some insights into the pitfalls and also the, benefits of doing that process. So you can use me as a resource.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate all the facts and details. That's
Definitely
great.
lead a card with Pete so that he
Yeah.
can,
Yeah, I will.
yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, Mary. That's great. Excellent.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thanks.
Is everybody doing okay? You need a short break, or you good?
Press on.
Press on.
Press on.
Yep.
All right.
4 in the morning comes really early.
Yeah.
And it's really 3 in the morning, so.
Let's see. All right. So on
Freeze.
to general business, and first item is item 6A. So let me pull up that. That's 6A. I thought I had it up already. Hang on. Now you can see our entire folder system. There's trees, nominations, 2020, 2019. Okay. Okay. So we're talking about the 2019 Heritage Stand nominations. We had 2 stand nominations submitted by Dorothy Dee Dalsra, one for Park Place Park and one for Mountain View Cemetery, and I'm going to go into a little bit of detail on each of those. You've all seen the purpose of our Heritage Tree Code. It is to recognize and foster appreciation and provide for the voluntary protection of certain trees because of their status as a heritage tree. And then we have some definitions. A heritage stand means a group of 2 or more trees designated that way. And then we have a secondary definition in our actual definitions code that says at least 2 heritage trees separated by no more than 20 feet. But I wouldn't get too hung up on the definitions. Then we have our criteria. First, we have our heritage criteria. At least one of these criteria must be met. And then we have our site and condition criteria, which have been significantly simplified since we last amended the code. It cannot be an invasive species, and it does require owner consent for private property, or if it's on public property, then the consent of the agency. In this case, the city commission would make the decision on both nominations. So the first stand is the Mountain View Cemetery Giant Sequoia stand, which is by the Parents of Murdered Children monument inside the park, inside the cemetery boundary. And, can you all see that on your screens? And there are 3 trees. Tree number 1 is 69-inch diameter, tree number 2, 88-inch diameter, and tree number 3, which is actually closest to the parking lot, is 130-inch diameter. And you can see the heights and spreads there. We don't have age estimates on these because it's so variable with this tree.
Do we know when they were planted, since they were in the cemetery or not?
I'm sorry?
Do we know when they were planted, since they're in the
I
cemetery?
think Karen Maury may know.
We inquired about it, we couldn't get an answer from them.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Yeah,
You want me to bring my core?
that would be great.
No, they're big enough.
Yeah.
And these are the photos of those trees.
Sometimes this lights up.
And there are some other photos in your packet as well. But these are all trees that are really magnificent examples. They are all causing some pretty significant cracking of the pavement right near them. So there's going to be some maintenance going on near them in the future, but the Parks Department doesn't see any issues with these designations here.
Yeah.
Okay.
I might indicate the Parks Department is looking at redoing the memorial area, but there's no plans to cut down the trees or anything in that process. So.
Yeah. Yeah, there's going to be some additional monuments and memorials placed. Yeah. That's what John Waverly told me. And then the next is Park Place Park, and if you've been out to there, it's a lot easier to visualize it if you've been to the site. There are 19 Gary Oaks, 2 Douglas firs, and 6 Atlas cedars. And here you can kind of see how those groupings are organized. There's I'll go back. The line of Atlas cedars there is closest to the children's play area, and then you have the slope going up from the park that it gets pretty steep on the northern half of that parcel. So it is actually within the geologic hazard overlay because of the slope. Some of those, one of the Gary Oaks is really fascinating because it has grown together and it has a hollow right through the middle of it, which is really cool. And then the Atlas cedars are unusual for their range. It's a photo of one of the Douglas fir trees. And here's a shot of the line of Atlas cedars. So PRAC had looked at this on February the 27th, and they recommended approval of the heritage tree stand nominations with the caveat that they not include any trees that are in decline. And so Parks and Rec staff are going to provide a little more detail about that at the city commission level. And I don't have all the details for which of those trees are truly in decline or not. But
yeah, that was a modification the committee made.
Yeah.
With non-native trees for the heritage.
Yeah, if they're big enough,
They can be non-native.
they can be non-native. Yeah. Because there's horticultural value in having multiple species.
Yeah.
So if you'd like, we can refer back to the criteria if necessary. The next steps. So this year, Arbor Day and Oregon City and Enhancement Day is going to be April 25th. So the mayor would make the Arbor Day proclamation. We're thinking tentatively on April 15th. So we would either present the recommendation of PRAC and the NRC for all of the trees, both the private ones and the park ones, on April 1st. And if need be, we can discuss it again with the city commission on April the 15th. So, and with that, I will put it in your hands.
Is there any discussion as to whether we should make a recommendation to approve this?
I was going to say support the Park and Recreation's Advisory Committee's recommendations that we supported.
Do you want to make a movement to do that?
Yeah. I move to support the Parks and Recreation Advisory Committee's recommendations to approve the heritage tree list.
Any seconds?
I'll second that.
Okay.
Do we need to vote individually on this?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Chris Weaver?
Aye.
Devin Pilney?
Aye.
Mike Hamilton?
Aye.
Nancy Brochot?
Aye.
Doug Neely?
Aye.
Great. Thank you, guys. All right, next item is the draft of the standards for tree removal, and I have a, where is it? Let me just find that. Yeah, here we go. Permitting and notification process for tree removal on institutional properties. So we had published the agenda originally on Wednesday last week, and staff have been operating with the direction of the city manager that it would be a policy that was strictly pertaining to city-owned trees or trees that are being removed by city staff. But we actually got better direction from the city commission. We went back and looked at what the original direction had been, and it was to draft a policy for all publicly owned land. So that's going to require a lot more notice and a lot more input from those agencies. So this is a very preliminary discussion. This may not be your first bite of the apple. We may need to come back and talk about this some more. As far as applicability, that includes all of the agencies listed here that have land within the city limits or within the urban growth boundary, but mostly within the city limits. And that includes the U.S. government, Department of Transportation, various divisions of Clackamas County, Metro, and Metro has some concerns about this because of their restoration efforts and that sort of thing. We will be getting comments from them soon, I anticipate. And it also affects institutional properties such as schools. So Oregon City School District, the Clackamas Community College. And it's not that the permitting that we currently have on file would necessarily change, although it might. I'll talk about that a little bit more, but it definitely would affect notification and providing public notice of pending tree removal, which is a new thing. The general process that we've drafted is first, if the tree is an imminent hazard, which is defined in the code, then this notification process would not apply. There would be a waiver for that. There would be a requirement to provide necessary mitigation and get the permits after the fact, once the hazard's been removed. And then there may be additional overlay district requirements, such as Willamette River Greenway, or Natural Resource Overlay District. We have certain exemptions written in for those overlay districts for, fairly innocuous tree removal and that sort of thing. Some of you are familiar with that. And then the next step would be to determine eligibility as a heritage tree. So the threshold for what would trigger notification, public notice, would be if it's eligible as a heritage tree and could be nominated as such, then we would trigger public notice of 7 days. And the notice would be why the tree is being removed, what the condition of the tree is, its species and that sort of thing, who the department is that's requesting the permit, and what the reason is. And also on that notice, we would include a link to the arborist reports that are required, and what the determination has been made at the staff level as to why the tree could not be saved. And so there's going to be some burden of proof on city staff to show that they actually looked at the level of feasibility of saving the tree, whether it included a meandering sidewalk or doing something else. And then if they decided not to do that because of cost, then that would be stated in the notice, or at least linked to in the notice. And then contact information for the staff person. So planning would be doing the notice, but we probably provide the contact information for the department staff that's actually requesting the permit. Then there'll be a calculation of mitigation based on our code. And if all of the questions are resolved at that stage, they would get issued their permit and they could remove the tree. If there are outstanding questions for city-owned land, I'll talk about that a little bit more.
Before you leave that, could you flip back there to that page? Mm-hmm. Oh, no, number 3, that's what I wanted to say. It says determine eligibility as a heritage tree. Does that mean if they're looking at the tree and PRAC or ourselves have not indicated it was a heritage tree, they would still look at the eligibility of it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's the size, it's the diameter.
Yeah, because what triggered this initially was it a good idea to use that table in the Heritage Tree Code as a good basis for additional review? And I think that there was definitely a consensus that it was.
Right.
And so additional requirements for trees removed on city property or by city staff, same process, but any outstanding questions or concerns that can't be resolved by staff will be referred to the city manager. And then he might decide to bump that decision up to city commission. But there are certain situations where city commission would be required, and that city commission approval would be required, and that'd be for any tree that's 50 inches diameter or greater. And then there'd be also a mandate to reuse the wood from any tree that's 25 inches or greater if it's feasible and it's not diseased. And then also establish a fund for alternatives and reuse of wood. So these are early details and we haven't fleshed them out fully. This is the first time this policy's been before any advisory body. Definition of an imminent hazard tree is here. Any tree that all or more than 30% of which has already fallen or is estimated to fall within 72 hours onto a target that cannot be protected, restricted, moved, or removed. So that would apply to trees that are about to fall as well as trees that have already fallen. Currently, we have 2 permit types for tree removal. We have the Type 1 minor site plan with a tree removal addendum. And this is basically when you're modifying landscaping, you have to get this permit through site plan and design review, which is generally an over-the-counter permit. It is for on-site removal on non-residential property, so it applies to commercial and institutional mixed-use employment and high-density residential zones, like multifamily. It's not required for residential property, so that's been discussion for many years is whether or not Oregon City is actually going to move towards regulating trees on private residential property. And it always comes up for debate, and up until now, we do not regulate tree removal on private residential property unless you're next to a stream and you're in an overlay district, steep slope, or stream protection area. And this includes city-owned land. So then we have trees in the public right-of-way require a public tree removal permit. Abutting property owners responsible for obtaining these. Sometimes the public works crews will do this on behalf of a abutting owner. If there's a code enforcement situation going on where the owner's not responsive, or in other situations where they simply just can't do it. But the process is the same. And they also, public works staff does pay attention to certain corridors like Beaver Creek Road and Molalla, so they're pretty proactive about that. And so the public notification will be triggered for trees that are eligible as heritage trees, and here's the table that's in the code. So it's all of these species that are listed of a minimum size, plus all other broadleaf tree species, I guess we mean deciduous by that, and at least 20 inches, and other conifers 18 inches. It would not be required for these situations where there's a sidewalk mobility hazard, an imminent hazard, or an invasive species. So the next steps would be the Natural Resources Committee could adopt or modify and continue to refine the policy. Then when it's ready, we'd send a draft to Parks and Rec Advisory Committee as well as Transportation Advisory Committee for comment. We'll be getting input from public agencies. Then we'll have a joint work session between you and Planning Commission. Then there would be a City Commission work session, and finally adoption. And I don't have any timeline for this right now, so.
It can take quite a bit of time to get all these other public agencies on
It
board.
certainly could.
He sent the draft to me a while ago, and then he said, oh, we can't do it. And I'm like, can't we just do this for the city and then start working on extending it? Because this could take years.
It could. Yeah.
Definitely.
Anyway.
When you're looking at reuse, we've got several parks here that have substantial pieces of natural area and so forth. And one of the reuses we might want to include in there, in fact, putting the log from the tree, the major stem there, on the ground itself to provide habitat.
That's a good idea.
I don't know there are any of our parks that have ponds or anything, but it'd be nice if we could identify places where they could actually be putting ponds or streams for habitat purposes there too. So that's one of the things. Great job of reusing some of our elm trees in the library for tables there, but it has other native, natural uses as well.
We're going to have a lot of wood.
But it is one of the uses.
Yeah, sure. That's a really great idea. Okay. I haven't. Staff has not come up with any, kind of speculation as to what the problems could be yet. We're really putting this out for public comment and agency comment, and we'll respond as necessary. So,
I could imagine in a situation where they deem that the tree has to go and they have to replant, that it would be good to have the criteria lined up for what actually constitutes a responsible replanting in that area. That it can't just be a younger specimen, but something that actually replaces the ecological worth of that tree.
Yeah, one of the things that's in the report that Laura put out was that trees that are larger, over 25 inches, I think. Any tree that is removed over 25-inch diameter, the minimum caliper size for the replacement trees would be 2.5 inches. But, that number could go up. I know there's
small tree
disagreement about, how well bigger trees establish, but at the same time, the value of the tree of that size. As you know, the swimming pool was able to put in some pretty large trees that were, I believe, 6-inch or 5-inch on site, and then the street trees themselves that they put in the right of way were 3 inches. They weren't natives, but they were pretty good sized trees. So it's doable, and so.
Was there anything in there that if they took a native tree down, they had to replace it with native trees?
Nothing yet, but that could be
I
part
think
of the
that
policy.
would be something good to put into
I know we have that
because we have way
requirement.
too many.
We have that requirement in the Natural Resource
Right.
Overlay District.
Right.
Natives with natives, but.
Yeah, I think that would be a good idea.
Okay. We did get a very brief email from the senior resource scientist for Metro, Brian Vaughn, saying that they do have concerns about it because they have open space and habitat places all around the Metro area, and they've run into this being a problem for their restoration efforts in Gresham. and on the Springwater area. So normally, if you're doing restoration, you're exempt from natural resource overlay district review. That's and this would be a sort of a separate policy in addition to that. So yeah. So I think maybe what we can do is, you haven't had a whole lot of time to look at this, but we maybe want to put it on for our next agenda.
Yeah. See if they have something more by then and have heard more agencies.
Yeah.
And, yeah.
And I'm not sure when is PRAC going to meet?
It's fourth Thursday.
Oh, okay. Fourth Thursday.
I think that's right.
Yeah. All right. Thanks. Anything else on that one? Okay. And so we added in the Beaver Creek Road
Right.
item. So, where is it? So I gave you a hard copy of this map and the memorandum that Christina put together. So it's a long memo and it talks about a lot of zoning code amendments that are not related to natural resources, but on page 4, they're talking about the Goal 5 inventory that was done for the Beaver Creek Road concept plan. And what this map indicates is the actual habitat map that was adopted with the Beaver Creek Road concept plan with our natural resource overlay district overlaying on top of it, so you can see where the outliers are. So this upland habitat regulation issue has been discussed quite a bit at the Planning Commission, and what's come out of that is that Nancy has provided a really great letter that talked about the necessity of protecting intact forest. And let's see, I don't have a copy of the overall map, but if we zoom in on this one, zoom in a little bit more. There are basically 4 habitat areas that we discussed. 1, 2, 3, and 4 down here. And the committee's recommendation was definitely for protection of areas 3 and 4, but then we have this 2-acre forest patch outside of that, which will be discussed by the City Commission. And the Planning Commission didn't recommend regulating outside of the natural resources boundary, but that would leave these areas unprotected, except for what we have as tree protection code, which is really not a tree protection code. It's more of a removal and mitigate type code right now. So the City Commission has the letter from Nancy, and what staff is really wanting is some clarity from the City Commission, but they are open to further discussion about this issue.
So you would bring it up to where those others are?
Yeah.
Yeah. Did you guys read my letter, or did you get it?
Did you guys have a chance to read that?
I read it.
Yeah.
So while we are,
Presentation thing, but
this would essentially be a local protection that would be above and beyond what we're required to protect under Metro. But at the same time, if it's kind of an important part of the concept plan
pretty busy.
from an open space perspective. It's not just a requirement to comply with Title 3 and 13. It's a question of how does this work with the open space in the concept plan, and is it worth adding that additional protection
Right.
in order to implement that?
Right.
So.
And my contention was the upland habitat that's contiguous with the already protected forest, or should be protected. I don't know if it's really protected or not, but that fragmentation is just horrible. And,
Right.
I mean, I do research in Forest Park, which essentially is all edge because there's housing developments and roads, and so it functions as an edge habitat for the most part. And so the more intact habitat we could get protected in Oregon City, the better off we'll be, because there's nothing in the city. I mean, we got little forest patches, but that's all they are, little patches. We don't have any contiguous forest.
Right.
So.
And what I discussed with Christina this afternoon is that the committee can designate someone to speak on their behalf as long as you don't stray off topic from what you decided at this meeting. So that way you can, make the wishes of the entire committee known at the hearing on the 18th. So that's an option as well.
Christina came before the last, I think it was the last one, Parks and Recreation Advisory Committee, and I was presenting a concept of I want to say string and pearls, but I don't know if that's the right term.
Pearl, yeah.
But it's actually describing a pathway that comes through the area and then has parks along the way on the pathway.
That would be good.
And I'm wondering some of these natural areas that, the two that we didn't identify, if they, I don't know how they fall into the concept at this point, but whether they can be part of those pearls. I think that's the term she used, but I can't.
Pearl and string.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the idea, this area is bisected by, this creek, shallow creek, and then there's a lot of power line easements as well, under which you can't put structures. You can put roads and flat areas and parking lots and storm ponds and things like that from an urban perspective, but you can also do trails and open space in those areas. So the question is, given that it's employment land, for the other side of the coin is it's employment land, we're trying to develop it to its maximum extent for employment land, at least north of Loader Road. It's more residential to the south of there, but and it's severely constrained by these easements as well. And it's got quite a transportation network that needs to be developed if it's going to fully develop over time. So it's not easy, like most things in Oregon City when you're dealing with the urban growth boundary areas. So we wanted really just to give you an update on where we're at, because this memo has just been put out today. So, yeah.
Like my suggestion was to make some bigger lots where the forest was basically owned by a property owner, but it had a big E-zone on it, so it couldn't ever be developed and trees couldn't be cut down, because that's what they've done in Forest Park, the Dakota Heights, that whole area. I think they're 5-acre lots, and the house is on 1 acre, and the surrounding 4 is a big E-zone, and they're not allowed to cut trees or do any development or build anything in there. And, they get a tax relief, they get some tax write-off for that, and it protects the land, so it makes it a much more contiguous forested area. And those properties are just through the moon in terms of what their worth is. Try to buy a lot next to Forest Park.
Yeah. We have, in the Natural Resource District, we've got a provision for on-site density transfer, but it's mathematical.
And so they'd have to make denser someplace else to accommodate for having less density there.
Right.
But, I mean, to me, that would be a really good compromise to maintain the housing density that they need to get and to protect those areas.
Yeah, I think the constraint for commercial developers, they always want more parking than our code allows. Something, and then, that kind of means that, a big chunk of their sites are taken up by a parking area, and then the building sites themselves since we're not an inner city and we don't have these huge, high commercial real estate values, you just don't see the 3, 4, 5-story buildings. So most of the buildings that are going to be constructed here are probably going to be, 1 to 2 stories is my guess. But that said, there are some incentives that we could write in,
Right.
yeah.
And I think
provide.
the 2 forested areas are in the residential areas, so.
Right.
So
Yeah. And those
your
are
residential-
these bigger ones, yeah, they
Yeah.
are in the,
Yeah, the other ones up there, the ones that are adjacent to the contiguous forest are residential areas.
yeah. Now this one falls within the geologic hazard overlay
Right.
district, but that doesn't
There was
mean.
a chunk of it down there because there was
Yeah.
a 4th one that I'm not seeing right now. Maybe it's down here. It was here down here.
That's
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, but yeah.
Okay. All right. Is there anything else on that one?
When's the meeting?
It's the next next Wednesday, 7 o'clock. So,
Does anybody from the committee want to go and talk to, is it city commission?
City Commission,
City
yeah.
commission meeting?
Yeah.
I have a really long lap that day.
If you can't make it,
I'm not
I
going to be
will
able to
make
make
sure
it. so-
that, I relay your comments, so,
Yeah, I've got a really long lab and
sure.
considering that
Which
potentially
day
our
is
last
it?
week at school.
What date, Wednesday?
Wednesday, the 18th, yeah.
I'll be there for another reason, so,
Okay.
Would you be willing to,
yeah.
can you talk for more than one reason?
Yeah. With permission to actually represent the Natural Resource Committee.
Yeah. Because I think protecting that, especially that contiguous habitat is
Yeah.
crucially important for the city. And I think we'd be kicking ourselves 10, 20 years down the road if we didn't do
That's
it
right.
because there's not going to be any left.
So maybe you guys want to make a formal motion about Nancy's letter? I'm not sure we've done that before.
Yeah.
I don't know.
So,
It'll be in the packet anyway, but it's
It'll
nice
be in
to
the
have
packet
it, but
anyway,
it
yeah.
actually, it's nice to have it read out.
Right.
Because
That
the
would be
broader,
good.
the
Yeah.
broader public that's
Right.
there can hear it.
yeah,
There
that
you
would
go.
be
Yeah.
great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So do we
So
want to make a motion? Somebody want to make a motion for Doug to read the
Yeah.
memo at the,
I move to allow me to represent the Natural Resource Committee and read Nancy's letter
All right,
to
I'll
the
second that.
City Commission.
Who was the second?
I'll second.
Mike?
Okay. Okay, Chris?
Oh, aye.
Devin Pilney?
Aye.
Mike Hamilton?
Aye.
Nancy Brochot?
Aye.
Doug Neely?
Aye.
Great.
And can you change the spelling of my name somewhere in the memo? I mean,
Yes.
I spelled my name right, but I double checked, 3 times.
Bill
This is
is,
your letter, right?
Yeah, it's right on my letter. But somewhere in this packet,
The letter
she
itself
says
will
something
actually
about
be
me and
in the packet.
it's spelled
yeah,
wrong.
it's in there.
It'll be spelled right in the packet that they have.
Yes, except somewhere in this memo, it's spelled
Okay, we
incorrectly.
may want to point that out in public.
I don't remember what page it was on. I'm so used to everybody spelling my name wrong, so.
Okay, good job. We're cruising.
Okay.
So that takes care of general business around the communications and updates. And I think I go first, so I'll try to be quick. First thing I wanted to let you know about, we've talked about Beaver Creek, okay. So second thing is an update on the Kanemo wetlands. And Karen Blah has been patiently waiting. So welcome, guys. I just have a short slide. Wanted to bring you up to speed on the latest recommendation. So NRC and staff, we had recommended that the vegetative corridor width around this wetland be 50 feet. Planning Commission voted on the 10th of February to not apply any portion of the vegetative corridor to 514 4th Avenue for reasons that were principally because it was disproportionate impact to that property, but they didn't direct staff to make any findings of any kind or base that on any particular legislative criteria, but they did state very clearly that they felt that it was unfair to the property owner. Given that the cottage home site was already allowed to develop and the other properties that weren't really impacted. However, we went to the city commission on the 18th, and they asked us to, and Doug was there and suggested that there be a 10 to 15 foot strip that ran parallel to the interior property line, and I hope I've accurately recommended.
I would like to
Yeah.
I would like to point out something.
Yeah.
It wasn't, this is longer than I actually meant to show.
Oh,
When I
okay.
showed the parallelogram, of course I didn't have the fancy stuff, so I had to get a picture and draw some lines and send it to him. Actually, I was talking about this 15 foot, this 10 foot, actually starting here.
Okay.
At the wetlands.
Oh, 10 foot from the
Not
edge.
extending so far
Not
into
extending
where
so far.
the current
Okay.
piece is, and I imagine that's easy for you to correct.
Oh, yeah, I mean, we can do it on the record, you know, and then the city
Yeah,
commission.
And so, so it wasn't as long. Anyway, the owner of the property is here, and she approached me afterwards and asked me why I didn't bring this up at the planning commission. Well, the reason I didn't was because when we had the public comment, it was on the first picture. The second one, the planning commission made their decision, and there was no public, and when they make the decision, then there's no public comment.
Right.
So I made my comments representing the Natural Resource Committee, not this committee. No, the Greater Oregon City Watershed Committee, not this committee. But my concern is that in the second picture, there was no connection between the overlay at the far left side of the actual designated wetland there, down to the vegetative corridor that is given in gray, which is on an unplatted street there. So I felt at least there should be some connectivity between the two overlays, and that was the basis of my recommendation. The city commission actually introduced, instead of the first reading, a tentative, I guess, reading.
Yeah.
Which it was a 3-2 vote to accept my recommendation. But that, that isn't necessarily what the city commission is going to do.
Yeah. So, yeah, we've recommended first reading based on this proposal. We prepared revised findings, made some additional findings in the staff report that the city commission can adopt, and that basically refer to this striking a balance between protection of the resource and giving the property owner a reasonable portion of the property to develop in the future. There'll be more than one. There'll be two hearings. First hearing coming up on the 18th, and then April 1st, I believe. So we'll see.
The first one's where we can make public comment. That's the first reading.
Yeah.
Second reading,
Second reading's usually
public comment is closed.
Closed. Yeah, that's right.
So that the 18th would be the one where I can make a comment.
Okay.
And
so you're going to be there anyway.
I'm going to be there. I'm going to be there with a describing this, but I'll also have a more general letter, not applying to this property, but in general, in terms of how these things are happening. And I want to talk about that, but I'm sure the property owner wants to make some comments. And then I want to talk about the general process in which this has happened afterwards. Do you want to talk?
Oh, now?
If you want to, sure.
Would you like to? It's up to you.
I mean, if you have problems from what I've recommended, this is a good time to talk about it.
Oh, do you want me to come forward? Yeah, sure. Please come forward.
Karen Blaha, Kanema. I certainly appreciate Mr. Neely's attempt to mitigate the situation, which has been extremely disturbing, stressful, terrifying. I have more comments or more adjectives, but I'll forego those. So I'd like to take a look at this and think about it for a bit. It certainly is a big improvement, a big improvement. So I'd like to talk about it with my family and think about it, and then I think we'll be able to make comments at the city commission, will we?
Yes, you can.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, I mean, we're gonna wanna probably, pace it out in our yard, because the other one, I mean, it took up half of our property.
Yeah.
And almost all of our backyard. And when we talk about building, all I had thought about doing was adding on to the house, not, dividing the lots, building, I never envisioned that. So it was more just adding on to the house to have more of a proper living arrangement for an 83-year-old woman, going into 84. And 85, and then 86. So anyway, that was like, so I appreciate it. I appreciate your consideration and your sensitivity to my situation.
I was talking to my age thing to my grandkids, 3 of my granddaughters, who were adults, and I told them that I was planning to live to be 120. And the reason I'm telling you this is your parents are probably going to be dead, and you're going to have to take care of them. One of my granddaughters looked at me and says, "Grandpa, you got 10 grandchildren. We're all going to contribute some money to have somebody else take care of them."
A very nice place where you can get, 3 squares and a lovely, lovely place to lay your head. Yeah.
Yeah, of course, I wasn't able to get in there because, there are no streets that are actually going to this area. So I really don't know how you're...
Are you talking... that's one thing that I'd like to bring up. I appreciate that. No one has come to look at the property, come into my backyard, which I would have loved to have had. And everybody, the whole commission said that they had seen the site. Well, they had not. They had not. They see the cottage development site, they visited, when they say, "Have you visited the site?" "Oh, yes. No. Unless you were trespassing, which,
Well, yeah, that's part of the problem, is that they could see a development site perhaps before it was developed or something of that nature. They would really have to get your formal permission to cross into that.
Which I had offered that. Every place I've gone, I said, "Come on over," and I realize the ex parte contact business, all that's a problem. Sometimes, I'll stay in my house and you can just, give you a cup of coffee and tea, and then I'll go in my house and you can see what you think. Nobody's looked at it.
We've handled the public notice, and we've handled like it was a quasi-judicial hearing, so they've been very careful about that ex parte contact. That's maybe part of it, but...
I don't think so. But, I mean, I'm not saying you're wrong, but I don't think so, because there are ways to handle that.
Well, I mean, we have to be very careful of bias, so...
I understand that.
But it's a legislative proposal, so it's okay. Anybody can say what they want.
Yeah. No, I understand all that, So, again, thanks so much.
No, I appreciate it.
And especially you, Mr. Neely. Really appreciate it.
We'll see ya.
Yeah. So then...
She asked me a question afterwards. And I gave my opinion, but I'm not sad. She said she has some raised beds in the area where this is occurring. I said, I think if the raised bed is currently there, they can stay there.
Yeah.
That's not an issue. It might be an issue if you want to build something into it now, but if it's something that's already there, I don't think it's an issue. But I really wanted to confirm your question, Pete.
Sure. I mean, there's a whole list of exempt activities that have to do with pre-existing gardens and things like that. what they're really talking about is new impervious surfaces, and that's what gets regulated. And that could include a structure or just paving an area, so, yeah.
So like if you had a tool shed, is that,
Even a
but
tool
on
shed,
posts,
yeah.
that's not.
Yeah, it's considered, that's
is
considered
it?
an impact, yeah.
But
that's-
if it's already there?
Not if it's already there.
Yeah.
And then it's only if it touches the,
And then it's
Buffer
only
line,
if it
right?
touches that vegetated corridor.
yeah, that's why we have to know
And
specifically
it
where
can be
that is.
within
so
that
we can-
corridor, but then you get triggered for doing an application, and you have to hire a specialist and do a mitigation plan, blah, 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 which is, that's been your concern.
Yeah, that it has been the concern, yeah. So, okay, thanks so much.
Thank you.
We got an opening on the Natural Resource Committee if you're interested.
Yeah. Good time.
Another specialist, point of view, perhaps?
I think if you live in Kenema, you're a specialist.
Just about everything.
Okay, what else did I have? All right, let's see. Oregon City Enhancement Day, we mentioned. Enhancement Day, Arbor Day, Saturday, April 25th from 9 o'clock to 12 p.m. with a tree dedication ceremony at the end of the Oregon Trail Interpretive Center, followed by a work party at Singer Creek. They're asking all volunteers to pre-register on the website that's listed here on the card. And then it's usually a good time. There's breakfast, food, and presentations and T-shirts. And this time it'll be fun because they'll be doing ceremonial planting of the Hiroshima Peace Tree, which is a ginkgo, to mark the 75th anniversary of the close of World War II. So that'll be good.
I on the PRAC suggest that it be done at the Peace Garden at the Senior Center, because the Peace Garden was a sister city project with a place in Japan. They said there wasn't enough room there, and I looked and I thought there was, but in any case, I think since we had that specifically Peace Garden with a sister city in Japan, I thought that would have been a better spot. But it would be better viewed down at the Trail Interpretive Center.
And they don't know what sex the ginkgo is. So 25 years from now, we could
Be like I am, still
pleasantly
picking up
surprised.
puke balls. This has been a bumper crop this year. And even with the windstorms, I still have a couple of dozen up there.
Then in your packet, I put the notice of decision for Forest Edge Apartments stabilization. So you have their presentation on that. It was issued on February 21st, and there have not been any appeals. So that decision is final. And I'll be moving ahead. This is listed on it. Standard with all our notice of decisions, we have all the conditions of approval listed. And you can look through those. The ones that say, the conditions of approval that have a P in parentheses, that means that the planning division follows up on those conditions of approval. If there's a DS in parentheses, that means the engineering department, development services, follows up on those conditions of approval. And these would be tied to issuance of a building permit in most cases. And in some cases, they're tied to issuance of final certificate of occupancy. But in this case, they've had conditions added by the city commission at the December 19th, 2020 meeting, which are conditions. Oh, you right?
Yeah.
How did the, which are conditions 34 through 40. And then finally, I wanted to give you an update on where we're at with the comprehensive plan. We just made the decision today to go with the proposal by 3J. We had two proposals. We had a proposal from Angelo Planning Group and some subconsultants, and 3J and their subconsultants. But we decided to go with 3J, who's they're both excellent firms, both excellent teams, and both could have done an excellent job. But the reason that we decided to go with 3J was because they have good history with us and have helped guide us through a lot of public involvement processes in the past, and are very familiar with our codes. But on top of that, they've really done some excellent non-traditional public engagement approaches, which is really what we're looking for. The first phase of this is we only have a budget of $50,000. And then the next phase of it, we'll be getting ODOT grant for, but this first phase is really emphasizing putting a vision together and doing public engagement for the first year. So we're asking the consultant to provide a toolkit for the city staff and committees to use that we can use. So that'll be the challenge, is putting together a big enough and diverse enough committee that really can do the work, and we can give them this toolkit and they can go and replicate and get feedback for this visioning process. So, and the examples of that type of work that 3J gave us were excellent. So that's Steve Faust. He's been on the South End Concept Plan and various other things. So that's all I have for updates. Thanks.
Anybody else have any updates?
I'm going to this is where I'll make my comments. Both this item and also the forest edge are my concerns. We received the overlay picture ourselves on that first picture that was put. And so we saw that, and I don't think we had any comments on it at that time. And then the Planning Commission went ahead and removed that whole segment there. To me, when something like that happened, we've seen it, and I guess by not saying anything, we gave our approval, and then by not seeing the revision, we had no input.
Right.
That disturbs me, and it comes also to the forest edge piece. Forest edge piece is an attempt, and I hope it works, to stabilize that area and deal with excess water at the site. But it is in the NROD, and to my opinion is that it should have come to us. Now, you may have all seen this thing, because I get these emails and I kind of check them. I went to speak at this one and I gave some input. Some of my input was in one way or another incorporated into what they suggested, and also in the condition of approvals that came forward from one of the city commissioners there. But us just getting emails about what's coming to the Planning Commission, City Commission, isn't sufficient. If it's something that's in the NROD, we should see it. And I think both the change that the Planning Commission suggested there, they could have delayed the City Commission one time out and have an opportunity for us to see it. And in the Forest Edge Department's piece, we should have actually seen what they were doing, and
so
I think what's done is it's fine, because I think there's going to be less chance of a landslide and so forth. But we need to really be in the loop of these development things that go forward, and sometimes we're just out of it.
Yeah.
I just want to ask a question. So are you not getting the agendas, or is you?
I'm actually getting something to say that particular item is on.
That item is on there.
But
yeah.
But if we don't catch it, then it disappears. I'm saying it should formally come to us.
Yeah. Right. I see.
So I caught this because I saw the item that was sent out an email.
Right. I see. Yeah. Okay. No, that's totally fair.
And if I go there, and of course I did not represent the City Commission when I gave the Natural Resource Commission, when I spoke, I was speaking as an individual in terms of Forest Edge, and then representing the Oregon City Watershed Council on this particular item here. But if I go there as an individual, I'm not representing you, and so you had no input necessarily.
Right. Well, it's like the memo I wrote about the Beaver Creek. It was like I had to do it because we weren't meeting. So.
Yeah. That's been the challenge all along.
Right.
both only having one meeting a month, but also having to abide by public meetings requirements, so with notice and
Right.
deliberations, so.
So that's a complaint that I registered.
Okay.
And I was, talked to the director of planning and.
Yeah, okay.
It also says that we need
I
to be
don't
more
think we've resolved
proactive
this yet. I think
you know,
this
if
is
you
an
see
ongoing
something.
issue.
If I don't catch it, if
used
you
to
catch
watch.
something, any of you, like, wait, we should be talking about that, so.
Yeah.
We have a group email or something like that? Where
We have
can
group
exchange
email, but here's the thing, public meetings, you're an advisory body under Oregon State public meetings requirements, and that means that if you are talking to one another and coming to conclusions or even deliberating about something that you're going to decide, that's supposed to be at a publicly noticed meeting. You can have two people at a time talk to one another, but you're not allowed to have those two people go and talk to somebody else and somebody else, because that's called a serial meeting.
But the
It's
mayor
really
of
strange.
Beaverton,
Pardon?
the mayor of Beaverton, he had a situation that went before the courts, and the decision was named after him. I can talk to you, and I can talk to you, and then they said, no, you can't do that. I can talk to you.
Right.
But I can't then talk to all of you. I mean, that's basically making a decision, even if two of you are meeting.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
it's better that we meet all of us together and talk about it.
Right, and to some extent, adding in the provision that we put in about meeting with the NRC before you apply for an application in the NROD is helping with that, but it's not fully resolving this issue yet. So I'm open to suggestions moving forward.
If there's a need to do that kind of consensus, is there a mechanism for us to meet formally outside of our monthly schedule?
Yeah, there is. I mean, you could meet outside of your formal schedule. We just have to provide notice of it.
And find an agreeable date.
Yeah, well, true, but I'm just saying, how we make it more formal, even if we have to sit here and.
Not necessarily. I have to record it, either on a handheld recorder. If
It
it's not
can't be one of us that records.
The city recorder will want input on
Right.
on this response. So I would need to take this question to the
Yeah,
city
I'm just trying to
recorder.
figure out if.
Yeah.
we can
Right.
They
compress.
generally want you to meet here, but you don't always have to. Yeah.
Well, it would be
We
kind
have
of
to
an
provide the-
emergency meeting. I mean,
Right.
it would have to have,
Yeah, and you have to
very
provide
streamlined.
a public notice with the location and a time.
yeah,
So
How long is the public notice?
24 hours. sufficient?
I've asked that, and I think it's 24 hours is okay.
I'm trying to remember when it shows up on my Facebook post that we're meeting.
Generally, it's a week. Generally, it's a week, though. Yeah.
And for this to happen, do we all have to be present?
No, you have to have a quorum to make decisions. So,
Okay.
Which is 4 of us?
yeah. So, let me talk to Katie Riggs a little bit more about this. Does PrAC run into this issue? No.
I guess I'm more sensitive to natural resources.
Yeah. Right.
I mean, we're in kind of a unique position in that we work cooperatively with the planning commission, and so we're not a advisory committee to a department like PrAC is, or Transportation's advisory committee.
Well,
to Public Works. We're in a different situation.
yeah, I mean, one suggestion might be, you put together a letter that says, this has happened, it's happened before, it's of concern to the committee that once an advisory opinion leaves this committee and it goes up to planning commission, city commission, they may make a decision without us being involved after that point.
I'd be
And
happy
that's-
to
and that's a
draft
You want
concern.
to draft that?
Yeah, I'll draft
That'd be
it.
great.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah,
And then they're on notice about it. So,
yeah, that would be good, yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Incidentally, there's a seat available on the natural resource.
There is an opening on
I've been considering doing, that's why I'm sitting to this whole thing. What these meetings are like, I might put my...
Great. I encourage you.
Yeah.
All right.
So future agenda items, does anybody have
Did
any?
you guys have anything to report?
Oh, I don't. Do you guys have any?
All right.
I'd be honest if I did.
I'm too tired.
I know.
I get it.
Past my bedtime.
It is way past my bedtime.
Yeah, this was a long one, definitely. So,
Future agenda items?
well, we'll be revisiting the tree policy.
Right.
We may have, I know we're going to have another presentation, but I can't recall what it's about at this point. And then we'll probably be kicking off recruitment for project advisory team, so you may want to be thinking about which of you wishes to volunteer as a representative of the NRC on the comprehensive plan project advisory team, so we can talk about that.
Is that'll be a monthly thing?
I doubt it. I think
More frequently?
yeah, it could be monthly. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
that's a long time commitment. I mean,
Yeah, because it's 2-year process.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And this is 3 years, so, right.
Yeah.
yeah, we can fit it in.
Thanks, Doug.
You're retired, aren't you?
You thought he was.
Not anymore.
For a short amount of time. All right.
So should we adjourn this meeting?
Sure.